Hello again. In this lecture, we want to look at the elements of progressivism. We're going to limit our discussion to 4 elements of progressivism. Again, the progressive era is a little bit difficult to define. There is a pretty good historiographical argument that goes on about what constituted progressivism. And so we want to look at 4 identifiable and agreed upon characteristics of progressivism. These are responsible citizenship and democracy, a trend toward regulation, the apotheosis of efficiency, and a commitment to social justice. Let's look at these one at a time. The concept of responsible citizenship and democracy go hand in hand with progressives. That is, they wanted to expand democracy, but they only wanted to expand democracy for responsible citizens. Some of the elements that we see in this expansion of democracy are the creation of primary elections. Now, I know that in modern political seasons, there are many people who decry the weirdness of primary elections and how the primary election voters tend to be the strongest party members, and how that, in these people's eyes, sometimes distorts the political positions of the candidates. However, prior to the invention of the primary election, candidates were chosen in back rooms, literally the old smoke-filled rooms. They were candidates for everything from dog catcher, the proverbial dog catcher, to President of the United States. It had nothing to do with the will of the people. It had to do with the will of party bosses. And in order to break the stronghold of party bosses, then many states went to a primary election system. Who was the first state to do primary elections? 1896, South Carolina, in order to break the hold of party bosses. The people got a say in who the candidate was going to be, the standard bearer. Another set of things that demonstrate a commitment to democracy are initiative, referendum, and recall. All of these were first adopted in South Dakota. Initiative is the notion that, well, let me make an aside here. You have to understand how a bill becomes law before this will make any sense. So a bill becomes law by a legislator, we're talking about states, a legislator, quote unquote, putting the bill in the hopper. That is, submitting a written up bill, probably not its final form, but submitting a bill to the legislature for consideration. Now, what if the legislature is owned by special interests, or it's hard for people to get things done with their legislature? They don't have a direct line. If a legislator does not submit a bill, then a bill does not go forward, even if many people want it. Prior to the initiative, there was no way to get a House or a Senate at the state level to send up a bill for consideration if no legislator agreed to do it. So initiative is that concept by which the people can gather enough signatures that they submit their own bill to the legislature, bypassing all of their legislators. They submit the bill directly. Well, in the initiative, a bill could come in from a group of people, but if the legislative bosses did not want the bill to go anywhere, they could just assign it to a committee and it could die in committee. They could also refuse to bring it up for a vote. So then the bill just dies. Another version of the initiative takes that out of the hands of the legislature itself. Referendum is the idea, and this is prevalent on the West Coast of the U.S. in which the people can not only submit a bill, but they themselves can vote on it in a regular election. And if a majority votes in favor of a bill, then that bill becomes law with or without the legislature. And this has been used extensively in California, Oregon, and Washington. Another of these progressive era reforms that indicate a commitment to democracy is the recall. Now, you may think, particularly in the last 10 years, the United States has heard about recalls of officials, particularly governors. There was the recall of Gray Davis in California that led to the election of Arnold Schwarzenegger. There is, and I have to say is because of when I'm recording these lectures, which is in March of 2012, there is currently an attempt to recall Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin. Recall doesn't exist in all states. Initiative does not exist in all states. Referendum does not exist in all states. Some states went that way, some states did not. Recall is the notion that given enough political pressure, the people can vote an office holder who's subject to the recall law out of office. Not impeach this person for some kind of high crime or misdemeanor, but simply vote them out of office. Now, of course, this is hard to do, and it's supposed to be hard to do. I don't know if you remember the recall election in California, but one of the silly things that happened in that was that over 160 people filed to run for governor, including a porn actress, including TV stars and former TV stars, including the usual array of people who will run for governor. But one of the reasons that so many people ran for governor was because the recall law put into effect in 1911, 1912 in California set the filing fee at $3,500. Now, $3,500 in 1911 was like $65,000 in 2005. Well, they had never changed that amount. It never grew with inflation. And so many people could get hold of $3,500 to gain publicity by making a run for the governorship. Not very many people would have run if it had cost them $65,000. Moving on, another indication of direct democracy was the 17th Amendment passed in 1913 that called for the direct election by the people of their senators. Until 1914, senators were not elected by the people. They were appointed by their state legislatures, usually their state senates. They did not represent people, they represented the state. And one of the progressive era reforms in favor of wider spread democracy was directly electing by the people of senators, so that senators represented the people of the state, not the state itself. And this kind of broke up, at least to some extent, the quote-unquote old boys club that existed in most states between the state legislatures and the Senate of the United States. Now, this idea of responsible citizenship goes back to restricting the vote to those people who will exercise it responsibly, whatever that means. So democracy was not absolute. There might be literacy tests, there might be poll taxes, there might be an attempt to restrict voting to quote unquote the better people. But at least in that group, there was supposed to be a wider spread democracy. We'll talk about the limits of progressivism in a later lecture. Let's look at another element of progressivism, and that is the desire to regulate rampant business. Now, regulate means that you have come to terms with the existence of this new thing, the big business, the giant corporation, but you want to scale back its abuses. The socialists wanted to get rid of big business. The Democrats wanted to get rid of big business, but many of the progressives were content to allow big business to exist, but to be disciplined and to be responsible and to act responsibly. Busting trusts was one way of disciplining big businesses, and Theodore Roosevelt became known as a trust buster. Amazingly enough, he busted fewer trusts than his successor, who was not a progressive as much as he was a member of the old guard, William Howard Taft. But Taft believed in business regulation as well. Now, TR, as you can see from this cartoon, understood that there was a difference between big business and bad trusts. And in fact, not all trusts were bad, according to TR. And he did not want necessarily to get rid of trusts, only to discipline those that became monopolies in restraint of trade and competition. We see a movement, at least at the federal level, toward a stronger Interstate Commerce Commission, one that had some real teeth to it. And we see a move toward greater railroad regulation, which affected the entire country and was kind of the lightning rod for much of the ire of many people and much of the desire on the part of trust busters to, or at least business regulators, to gain some control over. And though we'll talk about it a lot more in a later lecture, I want to bring up a couple of examples of regulatory acts. The Pure Food and Drug Act, for example, passed in 1906 with the help of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, is an act that aimed at regulating business practices and the adulteration of food in the interest of a public that was defined as neither labor nor capital. It was completely outside of that bipolarization that occurred during the Gilded Age. There's a third player, and that is the public. And it might be, in the case of the Food and Drug Act, the consuming public, identified not by being a producer or by being a rentier, but by being a consumer of goods and services. The Hepburn Act is another act that talks, or that gives illustration of regulation. The Hepburn Act regulated railroad rates and strengthened the Interstate Commerce Commission directly. Another element of progressivism is the belief in the efficacy of efficiency. Efficiency became a mantra. Frederick W. Taylor, the time and motion study creator, created not only time and motion studies of industrial actions, industrial activity, I guess, is a better word to use. He created a whole body of thought summed up in the phrase scientific management. That is, you didn't manage as a craft. You learned all of the steps that it took to do the tasks that were below your pay grade. And you analyzed those tasks, and you tried to see if you could put them together in a better order
or if you could figure out how to make them work better, and then rather than allowing your workers to learn these tasks in the apprentice system or by being trained in the craft system, then you, the business manager, because that's who paid for scientific management advice, would then take control of training. And whoever trains controls that worker's work. Workers saw through this pretty quickly, and Taylorism, as it was called, it took a long time to be adopted across the board. But much like some of the old robber barons' ideas, like cost accounting and marginal profitability, Taylorism took on, it came to be useful, at least in bits and pieces. But that is a demonstration, an illustration, an example of this engineering paradise. This was the age of the engineer, the age of the manager, actually a heroic age of the engineer and the manager. Not that they were heroes, but there weren't any rules. They were making it up as they went along. They were learning how to be engineers and managers. Expertise was prized in every field, whether it was the expertise of the historian, or the expertise of the political scientist, or the expertise of the civil engineer building a road. This was the era in which the common knowledge was downplayed and expert knowledge was played up. Now, this took a long time to occur. It didn't happen overnight, and we didn't start out with, in 1895-ish, with people all being kind of generalists, and then in 1917 they were all specialists. It didn't happen that way. We're talking about a veneer of change that ultimately set the stage for what we know in our own lives as, increased democracy, regulation, efficiency, ultimately social justice. Another area of efficiency we can see coming to the fore in the development of the city commission concept of government. The city commission was a new thing under the sun, you might say. Formerly, where city commissions had not been adopted, and before the city commission form of government, then city councilmen represented districts, and they were politicians and healers of one form or another. And they were interested in the political aspect of holding their office, as well as doing a pretty good job for their constituents. Well, in Galveston in 1900 came the devastating hurricane of 1900, and it flattened Galveston and killed 6,000 citizens. Services were completely disrupted, and it took a long time for them to come back. Eventually, they couldn't even move all the bodies. Eventually, the business community of Galveston and interested progressive citizens of Galveston decided that the city council had to be done away with, that these guys couldn't restore services. And so they went to a new system, and the city council agreed with this. They went to a new system by which city councilmen would run departments of government. That is, a commissioner would not represent so much Ward 3 as he would be in charge of the police department and the streets department. And another city commissioner would not represent Ward 2, but would be in charge of sanitation and administration. And along with that usually came a city manager, unelected, hired by the city to be the chief executive officer of the city. Again, efficiency and business management. Galveston started using this in 1901, and by 1911 it had spread pretty much all up and down the Mississippi Valley and was spreading out toward the coast. City commissions were dissolved. Some cities still have commissions, but they're still really like councils. Um, Birmingham stopped having a city commission in 1964, which is a story in itself. And by the 1980s, city commissions were pretty much done with. Now, we talk about government relying on expertise, and we see that at the state level most formidably in Wisconsin with Governor Fightin' Bob La Follette. I think I'm mispronouncing his name. I think they pronounce it La Follette. But regardless, Fightin' Bob, as he was known, when he was governor, did not make political decisions until he had asked the University of Wisconsin to supply him with researchers who would go out and look at data and then give him interpretations of that data so he could make data-driven decisions and data-driven policy. This was a matter of using university expertise in order to assist in state-level policy making. You don't do it because it log rolls for one of your buddies or it scratches the back of somebody whose back needs scratching. You do it, you make policy based on data and based on interpretations of that data. Now, the last element I want to talk about of progressivism is the element of social justice. We see this emerge and manifest in child labor laws, limitations on the hours of work for women that were sought at the state and federal levels. We see the compulsory school attendance laws coming into play at this period of time. And you may think that that's pretty unjust, being forced to go to school, but they were part and parcel of child labor laws. If you didn't have kids working on machinery from the time they were 5 until the time they died, then what were you going to do with them? Well, heck, put them in school and let them learn stuff. In fact, putting them in school and having them learn things, becoming well-educated and potentially experts, was a driver of child labor laws. They drove each other. What are you going to do with these kids if you don't have them working? And how do you get them to stop working and go to school? Child labor laws and compulsory school attendance laws. After the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York City in 1911, we see the emergence of occupational safety laws. These first emerged in New York City. They emerged in other places too, but the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire was so dramatic, with people jumping off of the 10th floor of the building because the fire hose pressure was too low to actually put the fire out on the 10th floor where it was burning. Then New York City said, "Oh gosh, we've got to do a big end run around this lack of occupational safety laws." Then the state of New York drew up an Occupational Safety Act that also included an industrial commission, and then this spread in fits and starts across the nation. Eventually, it became in the 1960s became nationalized in the Occupational Safety and Health Act, OSHA. The women's suffrage movement took on a new life in the 19-teens during the height of progressivism, and ended in the didn't really end, but the suffrage movement itself ended in the 19th Amendment, passed in 1920, which gave women the right to vote. So, we've looked at the elements of progressivism, which are responsible citizenship and democracy, business regulation, efficiency in business and in government, and a commitment to social justice. Thank you for your attention.